So thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Erik. Thank you, André, Fernanda, Anna. It's a great pleasure to have Erik Grönvall from IT University of Copenhagen. It's a joy to have this conversation, this emergent conversation. Thank you for all you coming. I will say small words about Erik now, about his formations. And today we have as a guest Professor Erik Grönvall, Associate Professor at IT University of Copenhagen at the Digital Design Department and founding member of the Co-Design Research Group, where he is the current head. Today, we are going to talk about care and design. It's an issue that makes me very curious, and I have many concerns, and I'm engaged to understand better this question. So I brought some words I'm going to read, and then I will share my screen with you to share the questions I made to Erik, and he's going to answer and to go through these questions I'm bringing to him. So care and design have been a topic that raises many discussions in the field of design. In the social and political science, and I have seen many discussions about the multiple dimensions of power that are at stake in the care process. In this framework, I propose 4 questions to stimulate this conversation, and I will let Erik talk about those issues. It's important to say that Erik received those questions in advance to build his speech, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Just a moment. Here. Can you see the? Okay, full screen now. So Erik, please be our guest in this moment. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you very much for that very nice introduction, and thank you very much for having me at your conference. It's a real pleasure to take part in it, I think. I think the questions you sent me also are very interesting, but they also they have many layers, I think, and maybe that's why you also asked them, right? But I will give some perspectives on what I think, and maybe then we can also have a more dialogue about them, and try to together explore some further aspects of them together. But I think let's take the first one. That's the easier one. I can talk a bit about myself and my background, right? And why I'm doing this sort of work. I think it's interesting that I'm asked to talk about care and design in the way that I'm not professionally trained in any of them, actually. I have an engineering background from Sweden in computer software engineering. So it's a bit strange that I'm even here. But I started to work in Sweden as a software developer, and a lot of the things I did started to we test things in the lab, and things worked perfectly. And then we got the things out to our clients, and all by a sudden nothing worked, as intended. We got it back in the lab and everything worked perfectly, right? So it left this feeling, there's something wrong with the clients. They don't use the technology right. They are maybe even stupid, I don't know. They were not capable, right? Because the technology worked, so it couldn't be our fault. So I had this sort of feeling going on that something was weird because things didn't work in the real life that we built. I started then to work more and more with health. So health from a tech perspective, working with, for example, implementing smart home technologies for dementia care. And for institutional living where people with dementia lived in sort of protected nursing homes. And it was the same things there, you know, the technology we developed worked good when it stayed on our desks. And then it didn't really work when it got sort of, where people, real users, got sort of to interact with this technology. But I didn't thought so much about it. But then I got this possibility to start my PhD. So I got back to university after working a few years, and that was in Italy. And all by a sudden, I got exposed to something called participatory design, coming from Scandinavia, right? So it's a bit strange. I went to Italy to learn about Scandinavian design practices. But all by a sudden, people started to talk about the users and that we had to think about the users and bring them into the design. And that started to sort of, then I realized what was wrong all those years I worked in Sweden, right? Because I never considered the user as someone that could have a say in the design, someone that actually had a meaningful contribution to provide, because they couldn't program, you know, they couldn't develop the technology. But in Italy, I learned that, you know, there is something called participatory design, and it's important to work with the people that are supposed to use your products, right? So that got me thinking, and I fall in love with participatory design and perspectives of user involvement. So then I came to Denmark and I continued to work there. And all that time I started to work more and more towards care and home-based care and understanding what happens when people get, you know, are expected to work with care by themselves. So for example, doing monitoring of health status in their own homes instead of going to the hospital. And there, of course, you know, there is this thing where the technology should enter into people's lives. It's not a mobile phone that they have bought because they like to use it, but it's actually a machine that they need to monitor a health condition that maybe they don't really like to even recognize that they have. So there's a completely other sort of motivation for using health technology when you're seriously ill, right? And maybe you're coping with an illness and realizing that you have it, right? At the same time that you get invaded with all this technology. So it's a very different thing to design for. And there it's very important, I think, to bring in the user and user perspectives. So that's sort of, I don't know how much I should talk about it, but that's sort of my background into this. And I've gone from a very technological perspective to amateur design, I can say, because I'm not a trained designer, right? But very much moving to a more humanistic perspective of technology and use of technology. And I think that's actually more interesting than the technology side, because the technology side can always be fixed, but you can't fix, you know, human interactions. You can't fix relations between humans, right? You have to work with them. And that's a bit different, I think. And that's why also more interesting. Yeah. Is that sort of an okay introduction?
It's a perfect introduction. And I have to say, I also felt in love with participatory design, almost by the same motivations. And yes, it's important. I like it very much. I don't know. As we said, I don't have to read the questions. Yeah. They are just to stimulate the discussions, and you can go further these questions. I think the most important issue for me in care and to think about care design is to bring it to a more material, to a more closer perception of these conceptions of care. And I think you have many examples to bring those issues about power and how people care, how they can be carried. If we can go into
I think that the power issue is super relevant, and it's also one of those with so many different layers, right? So it's in a way it's impossible to solve it, right, or to talk about it in 10 minutes or so. But some perspectives I have maybe, and some of these things are very easily spotted. You know, that a person in need, that's one thing, and that person needs some assistance from someone else, and that person provides that need. There's a clear power relationship between those two people, right? One can provide something that the other desperately need, and you can never come away from that power relation between those two. But I think maybe there are less clear or less obvious power relationships, and I think the ones you have here on your slide, between technology, people who care, people who are cared for, etc. I think even among one of these things, I think people who care, that's not a simple and straightforward group. Today I've been in a workshop about municipality provided care and volunteer provided care. Mm-hmm. So you have professional carers, and you have people that come in to help and to care for someone from a volunteering perspective. And I think there also you have very different motivations, but you also have very different power relations when these two groups are to collaborate, caring for the same person, because they come in with very different motives, but also different legal obligations. They come in with different support structures around them. And that really challenge the power between them, and with the relationship and power between them and the people they care for. So I know now, I don't know how much you know about Scandinavian healthcare and how it's organized, but much home care is provided, for example, for an elderly person, is provided by municipality provided care. So we pay tax, and when you get old, you have someone coming home and they help to clean and they bring food, and if you're really bad, they help also to you know, in the shower and bathroom and so forth. And it's a strict legal framework to dictate what sort of care you can and cannot have. And therefore, there's also some interest in understanding what can volunteers do that the municipality cannot do, right? But they don't really like to communicate, or there's always challenges in the collaboration between these two because they have so different perspectives. So I think there is a very interesting power difference and power challenge to work with. And I think there also, I think an outset for this talk is also a bit about participatory design. And I think there are challenges when you just look at these two groups that are very difficult to solve. How do you allow these two groups to work together when there are maybe rules or routines that practically prevents this sort of collaboration? Everybody would like to, but they're still prevented from doing it, right? And I think participatory design and having a very open dialogue where you bring in all the stakeholders to the same table. Of course, talking doesn't help, but working on just realizing we have the same goal, we're not working against each other, and actually finding out ways of how to work together. They can be with technology, but it could also be without, right? And I think that process of working towards resolving issues that you have, that's for me is really interesting, and it's all over this question, right? So how do you actually break down these power differences that you have, or how do you make the gap smaller at least? And that is very much about from my perspective at least, to have a very open process, but also an intervention-based process, because talking doesn't help. I think you have to experiment, and you have to fail, and you have to try out different ways of working. And that's not always easy when you have, for example, a municipality and the rules. But what we're trying to do now, for example, in Linköping, this city where I'm sitting now and having these workshops, that we're actually setting up municipality innovation labs. And that's a way for them to set aside resources, but also to create a sandbox, a space where they can experiment also.
De espaços onde eles podem experimentar e observar as regras e regulamentos que ele tem nos provedores de serviço e com os voluntários. E ele acha que não basta apenas criar esses laboratórios, mas eles têm que estar envolvidos na municipalidade, porque a municipalidade, o cuidado municipal é quem supervisiona essas decisões e cria as regras e pode organizar. Esses voluntários e profissionais podem se encontrar e discutir como melhor ajudar os pacientes. E também temos a tecnologia, é uma coisa clássica de poder, que as pessoas que têm muito poder, que têm acesso à tecnologia, as pessoas que não têm. Então, isso também entra na conversa. A digitalização, esse processo na Escandinávia, é muito forte. Então, eles têm encontros com o governo municipal, eles têm páginas oficiais, aplicativos, e aonde o paciente e as autoridades têm um pouco como se comunicar. Isso também significa que muitas pessoas gostam, mas que muitas pessoas com dificuldades ou problemas têm dificuldades de acessar, e eles ficam excluídos por conta das suas deficiências.
For all, and it's about making a better technology. I think we also have to realize that we cannot maybe design technology for all, but that means also that we have to think about those last 5% of people or 10% of what it is, and make sure that they are still on board. They can get maybe an easy technology, or we still have to have some people in the loop somewhere. And I think we are really bad in Scandinavia in general to think about that, because we have the hit rate of, I don't know, 19%. Yeah, then we can't do so much more, right? But I think that even if we set up separate solutions for the remaining part, I think in many cases, at least they feel excluded, and they feel special in the wrong way, because we set up a solution for them, but the solution also means that they get a stamp saying you're not capable. And I think that's also something that, what do we do with people's value and self-image, both when they can, but also when they cannot use these technologies. That I think also connects very much to power and giving and taking power, also about who you are and what you feel about yourself, right?
You said something that interested me a lot, that is that they are not talking about. Talking is important, but working together to solve the issues are the most important thing. Mm-hmm. I think that's a heritage of participatory design, something that participatory design help us and teaches us to work instead of just talking, to putting in practice. And sometimes I think how we can practice more than making discursive speech, and how you can perceive that in your practice, how tools, how design get inside your prototyping tools, design tools, how it appears in your perception. about care and design.
Yeah, and I think talking is always easy. It's the easy solution, right? I mean, look at us. I'm just babbling on, right? It's easy, but I think the challenge is actually to do something concrete, right? And that's what one have to do. And now you said something that also got me thinking, and that is, you know, when you work with sort of action research, right, and very much intervention based, I think then you do something, but it's also about what happens then. And now actually I think I jump a bit down in your questions, because one thing is that we can make an intervention and our experiments, and we figure out some good way of doing something. But something I'm myself struggling a lot with now in my research, but I think also in general, is what happens when our project ends, you know? So we find a solution, we work in a lab, maybe as I said, or in some other way. But when the funding is over, when we don't have more money, and we have maybe as researchers written our research papers, then usually nothing remains with these users, because the prototype will not continue to work by itself. It works as long as we maintain it, right? And I think that's also a difficulty here, that there's no real, or often we are bad at thinking about who will actually take ownership and responsibility of our interventions once we leave. And I see that as a really, really big issue, because and that connects also in a way to power and empowerment, that we open up the eyes of people and saying, see, you can do things different. Here is a new way of doing it, and maybe they really like it, and for them maybe it's a game changer. If we talk about health, you know, they can gain independence they didn't have. And then after a year, then we say, yeah, now our little experiment is over. It was great. We got free papers out of it, and now we will take you back to where you were 1 year ago, because the technology that provided you freedom will not work any longer. And I think that's also a really big thing when we talk about healthcare in particular, that, you know, what are our obligations when we work with also vulnerable users, right? When we sort of help them to realize some of their dreams, aspirations, we enable them to be more independent. And yeah, and then what? I mean, often we sadly end up in prototypes only, right? And I think we must also go further and work with industry, for example, but also as I'm trying to do now in this work, working with the municipality, which is the service provider for care, right? And gain work with them and gain sort of an a commitment. It can even be a contractual agreement, right? A commitment that says that, yeah, whatever we do, they should keep on doing it afterwards, right? And I think that's really important here when we talk about care. If it's good, otherwise we should put it in the trash bin, of course, but things that works well and people in a way feel that this is good. And I think a big challenge there, if I can rant a bit more about this, I think that many of these things that we do, they're really hard to measure. You know, if you sell an app, and then you can see, well, I have sold 1,000 copies of this app, you know, 1,000 downloads, or I sold 10,000. Then you can measure, is that good? Will I make profit out of this? But it's really difficult to measure quality of life. Maria, an old lady, you know, in this town, that she is a bit more independent, a bit more. She can do a bit more by herself. What's the value of that? And how much are we prepared to pay for that? And how do we measure it? I think that's really difficult. And that makes it also difficult, I think, for the organizations to commit to changes. If you understand what I mean, because they know what they have, but they don't know what they will get. And what we can say as researchers is, yeah, and we don't really know the value. Maria seems a bit more happy, but we can't say that it's, you know, we don't have the numbers because they operate by numbers, right? We can't say, you know, you will earn this and that, or you will be more effective, or Maria will not go to the hospital, you know, as often as before. Because those studies will take 5-10 years to do, and that's often not what we're engaged in design processes over a year or so.
It brings another issue. It's another matter of my concerns, that is the importance of qualitative research and design. How it's necessary, because it's welfare. It's a complex phenomenon, and we are not dealing with numbers at all. I work here at Maranhão with craft people. I've already told that, and sometimes they are paying to work. The money they receive, it's not enough to pay their bills, don't pay their working time, but they keep working. And we have we use a tool to measure these values you were talking about, and we have environmental values, social values, cultural, symbolics, economics, many kinds of values. And the star of values, they have many points of this star, and they say that the social, the cultural, the symbolic, they are much more filled than the economical and use values, because they are very concerned with the welfare that making crafts make to them, how they feel good making something manually. So I suppose that we are talking about the same kind of things to be measured.
Yeah, yeah, we do, and I think also, as you also hint, there are ways of doing it. I think the challenge, not everywhere, but in many organizations, is that they are not set up to recognize them. They are not run in a way that allow for that, because they are run by numbers, you know, by math, red numbers and black numbers, you know, input and output. So I think we can do, I think, very great work, but I think also we have to work inside the organizations like municipalities or government, and try to change this. I think it's also a lobby organization thing, right? You know, we have to also make them aware of that there are other ways of doing things, right? And it's not only the care technology, but it's also how they can think about value and the value a change and intervention can bring, right? That's maybe not measured in you know, in money, you know, or in time, resources spent, right? So I think it's more complex things where I think that we as designers of these technologies, and especially in the PD process, I think that's a great thing to bring into the participatory design. You know, can we also work with the organization while we implement and do participatory design of some healthcare tech? Can we also work with another part in parallel and saying, yeah, well, these things we develop on the political side, how will you work with it? How will you understand it? How can you perceive this in new ways, right? So I think it's a broader thing than just looking at one healthcare thing. You have to look at how it will fit in, how it will, you know, be valued in the organization, how you talk about value. Does it make sense? So I think, you know, we have to be, of course, you can go from device designer to service designer. That's sort of one step, but I think we also have to go yet another step and say, yeah, we also have to design the organizations that receive this, or part of it, the redesign part of it, to also understand how they can, you know, perceive the value work with the value and see values in new ways.
Perfect.
So
I put here in the chat if someone wants to make a question, to make take a position, né, de colocar uma posição, de fazer comentário, you can make comments, and I bring to Erik. So if there isn't any, we can go further.
I can babble on all night.
Oh, if you have 20 minutes, it's not a problem.
That's good. But I thought, I mean, to maybe end that part of it, I think also if we look at our responsibility as I say ours in the sense of people that work with PD, participatory design and design for care. I've done some work before on care models, which I think is quite interesting here. Also, when we talk about power and what does it mean to come with these technologies. And I think not to be overcritical, but I think that when we come out to the healthcare sector, I think, at least I have been, and I think maybe I can say many colleagues have sort of assumed that the existing healthcare models or the predominant healthcare models are the ones that we should support with our designs. And I think if I look at human-computer interaction papers on healthcare, so many of them works with compliance and compliance technology. And I mean, compliance then, it's like the doctor say you should take this pill once a day, and then you take it once a day, and then you are compliant.
Diz, por exemplo, tá aqui, você toma esse remédio uma vez por dia, e você toma, e isso é cumprir o compromisso. E se você esquece, você tá 50% compromissado, que pulou um dia. E aí a gente apoia esse modelo de cuidado. Mas existem outros modelos de cuidado no mundo. Fizemos muita pesquisa no estudo de adesão, que é similar ao compromisso, mas pelo menos você tem que concordar com o que o médico designa para você e não apenas obedecer. E aí vocês traçam um plano médico para você junto e aí você vai cumprir. Mas, e tem mais outros além desse. A concordância, e na concordância, esse modelo de cuidado é muito similar ao design participativo, porque a concordância é baseada em diálogo entre o médico e o paciente, e onde vocês juntos têm que descobrir que tipo de tratamento serve para você. E aí você fala, mas por que não apenas seguir as ordens do médico? Mas há algumas medicações ou alguns tratamentos que te fazem muito cansado. E aí o médico fala, você tinha que tomar de manhã. E aí você fica muito cansado à tarde, na hora que está no trabalho. Mas talvez não tenha que ser que você tem que tomar de manhã. Talvez você possa tomar à tarde. Não é tão eficiente, mas ainda bom o suficiente para tratar a sua condição. E aí isso significa que você pode encontrar os seus amigos e desenvolver as suas atividades. O que não seria possível se você simplesmente aceitasse a recomendação do médico. E eu não estou dizendo que a gente deve sempre discutir com o médico e discordar da expertise, mas é interessante também fazer o médico pensar sobre a sua vida e a sua situação única e as suas necessidades únicas. E, na verdade, trabalhar juntos para descobrir o que funciona e o que não funciona para você. Porque, no final das contas, isso também vai te permitir ser um melhor paciente, entre aspas, e para ser mais comprometido com o seu tratamento. Porque, nesse caso, vocês descobriram juntos o que fica melhor para você. E nisso, nós como designers também temos que ser mais abertos para que tipo de pergunta nesses modelos que vem de outras disciplinas, mas também explorar outras alternativas e entender essas discussões. Eu acho que isso também é algo que nós devemos fazer e algo que podemos tentar colocar nos nossos projetos, nas nossas interações.
It's another great point.
É um outro ponto muito bom.
How we can bring this negotiation
Como nós podemos trazer essa negociação
inside the design process,
para dentro do processo de design.
and how much will be the space we are giving
Quão grande vai ser o espaço que nós estamos dando
to our stakeholders, to our participants,
para os nossos participantes, para os nossos colaboradores. Sim, porque essa é a parte assustadora, a gente fala disso. Deveria ser um processo democrático, mas nós todos deveríamos ser mais ou menos iguais. Mas eu me conheço e eu sou o primeiro a dizer que eu sou bem ruim em abandonar o controle sobre o meu processo e as minhas ideias criativas. Porque eu sou o designer, eu sou o especialista. Então, talvez olhar o panorama mais aberto. Então, talvez ter a coragem de abrir mão de um pouco de controle e abrir a mente para eles nos ajudarem a fazer as decisões. E talvez a gente tenha que ser melhor nisso, porque isso também, eles internalizam esses processos eventualmente. Eles podem começar a ser autorais nisso e tomar responsabilidade, porque quando você é responsável, eles vão reagir de outra maneira. Porque quando eles usam hoje em dia, nada é deles. Eles não são, é tudo orquestrado por outra pessoa. Então, eles se sentem não parte do processo. Não é fácil, mas eu acho que a gente tem que fazer isso.
So I guess, Erik, that we are talking about.
Eu acho, Erik, que nós estamos falando
about the representation.
Sobre a representatividade.
Because we are living in different
nós estamos vivendo em contextos socioeconômicos diferentes.
And also cultural diversity.
E também a diversidade cultural.
If you are thinking about, we are receiving people from Venezuela.
Se você pensar, estamos recebendo pessoas da Venezuela.
We are receiving people, you are receiving people from Afeganistão.
Vocês estão recebendo pessoas do Afeganistão.
Síria, North of
Síria.
And we will have to deal with.
E nós teremos que lidar com isso. E essa proximidade. Sim, e claro, é fácil para mim falar de desafiar um médico, uma figura muito autoritária na Escandinávia. Nós somos uma sociedade reta, uma sociedade horizontal. Mas isso também volta na pergunta número 3, numa maneira muito boa. Nós vamos ter que lidar com isso. Claro que eu falo dessas coisas pela minha perspectiva e minha realidade, e minha experiência. Mas cada um de vocês tem as suas experiências e realidades. E eu não tenho a menor ideia de quais são. Então, para começar com a pergunta escrita e voltar para o que você disse, qual é a sua imaginação? Como você pode contribuir para o nosso contexto? Ele diz, eu não acho que posso, porque eu não sei nada sobre ele. O que eu acho é que eu devo aprender sobre o meu contexto e desenvolver os meus pensamentos e técnicas e soluções que funcionam aqui. E aí vocês devem fazer o mesmo, sabe? E aí, nós devemos colaborar um com o outro. E aí, devemos aprender um sobre o outro e as maneiras que cada um faz as coisas. O seu estudo de caso pode informar o meu e vice-versa. E aí nós podemos oferecer soluções um para o outro. Mas eu acho que é um pouco ingênuo uma ideia de escandinava de design participativo pode ser exportada para outro país. Mas eu acho que é mais discutir o que estamos fazendo e como elas são compreendidas em lugares diferentes. Isso é uma coisa interessante que podemos explorar em qualquer lugar, qualquer seja a sua realidade. Eu não sei se é nesse lugar para lá que estamos indo, mas foi assim que eu interpretei a pergunta. E eu acho que também há essa ideia que essas coisas podem ser exportadas e que elas deveriam ser iguais em todos os lugares. E eu não acho que seja assim. Eu acho que, mesmo aqui, eu e meus colegas fazemos coisas muito diferentes. Eles têm métodos que eu não concordo porque não funciona para mim. Não é um método ruim, mas não funciona para mim.
So why should it work for you? You know, and so I think it's about contextualizing and taking ideas and trying to, make what works for everyone, right? But I think the learning is important, you know, from each other. But I think that said, I think that the general ideas like participation as a concept and working towards inclusion and against inequality, as you have here, I think that is important. At least that's my personal belief, wherever you are in the world, right? That can be in Europe, it can be in South America, it doesn't really matter. But it doesn't mean that a method that works when I work in a municipality in the middle of Sweden works, you know, in Brazil or some other place, right? But working with these issues is important, I think.
Yes, I really agree, Erik, that the approaches, the solutions, all of them, they have to be situated, contextualized. And I was, of course, participatory design, Scandinavian participatory design is it's inspiration for us. You know, we learned with the principles and the conceptions, but I really think that here in South America and the global South, if you can say that, because the countries are very different. We cannot also speak about Latin America because Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, they are very different. We are constructing this network here about participatory design, decolonization, and we are discussing these issues and how we cannot think about participation without talking about decolonization. We cannot think about participation without talking about autonomy. That's why this matters of care to make a contextualization with Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. I've been reading her book, and we are talking about relationships, and they happen in the situated places, they happen in the communities, in the tables, in the work tables. So I think your position, I really agree with it.
I must say it's a bit of a strange story. Maybe when I was much younger, you know, when I was young, I was 16, I think, something like that. I actually, one of my really strong memories, you know, I was involved in this people. I don't know what it's called in English. People education, sort of. organization, and they organize something called, if I will translate it, Learn from the South. And I think for me, when I was 15, 16, it was a really incredible thing, because there was a bit similar thing. There was that the idea of how you work with educating adults and working with democracy and these questions. It was also something that came from Europe, and it was exported, you know, but there was this people that said, yeah, but they're doing really great stuff all over the place, right? It's just in different forms, and we can learn from them. So it came 30 people from or around 30, 25 maybe, I don't know, from many places in the world outside of Europe, up and talked about how they worked with this sort of educational issues. And I think there, of course, you cannot also just take what they did and translate it into Swedish context. But I think as an inspiration and ideas of the idea that you can do something different than what you actually do, because at some point issues are the same. You know, how do you reach people? And you said relationships. How do you get contact with someone? You know, how do you work with culture with people that, you know, have a bad idea of culture? How can you use that? You know, so how do you reach? How do you get across? How do you talk about really sensitive stuff? It can be sex. It can be about drugs. It can be about abuse. How do you reach out and talk with people about that? And it doesn't work in the same way, but you can at least see that other things work. And I think maybe that's also what we can learn from each other, that you can do things in many ways, but maybe your way is not the best. And there are also other correct ways of doing it in a way, right? Other ways that work. And I think that's really interesting.
Was also thinking our time it's coming. We have only 9 minutes, but I'd like to make you another and last question. That's about, when we think about care, we think about something caring about or caring of a body. And how do you, just some ideas about that? I'm really interested in the questions about the body in design processes, and how we can care about care in a holistic and long-term perspectives, including the ecosystem of the humans, not humans, more than humans, with the environment. How do you think about that, just to close this lovely session? Thank you.
Yeah, I think one point we maybe been touching a bit about, and that is, you know, how we work with people and what we leave with them. You know, if we provide something that improve a person's life and then we take it away, that's not so caring, I think. You know, that's being evil. You know, so I think that is sort of one aspect of it, right? How we care or not care about our participants. I think there are also other perspectives when you say, you know, the bigger picture. And I think a big thing here in Europe is that there is a lot of, or all over, but we talk about it here, maybe you do it the same way, that if you analyze drinking water here around the big cities, you know, the sources for drinking water, there's a lot of medical remains in them. And also in the seawater, you know, you find a lot of medical remains. And why is that? There are many reasons, but of course, because one thing is that people are moved out from the hospital when they're still on very heavy treatments. Can be cancer treatments, etc., right? That requires a lot of heavy medication. And where we live, you know, in our houses, you know, that sewer system is not designed to filter out these sort of medical remains that, you know, leave our bodies, you know, when we go to the toilet. So they go out in the ocean and comes back in our drinking water. So we drink, you know, penicillin and all these things, medical remains. And I think when we design to move a treatment out of the hospital where they can take care of these sort of medical remains, and we say we should move people and let them be cared at home. So we move a treatment from the hospital into private homes. Often that is not made considering that environmental factor, that we move a lot of medical remains from a controlled sewer system to a normal sewer system where that's not designed for handling these sort of chemicals, right, or remains. And that affects the whole ecosystem, you know. And I think also there we have to take, I think, effect chains. I called it in one of the works. We have to think about the effect chains of our designs. So when we do something that seems to be very isolated, like moving a cure, a treatment, you know, some patients out of the hospital, it actually have a lot of effects on the neighbors. Let's say they have oxygen, you know, oxygen masks. They have a COPD, and then they should do oxygen treatment at home, rehabilitation. That oxygen tank is a big fire hazard. So if there is a fire in the house, it can be a huge explosion with that tank, right? And if the municipality or the fire department is not made aware about that tank now being at home and no longer in a hospital, you know, it can be very dangerous for them also come and put out a fire. So you know, you have to think about, yeah, the fire department must be notified that we have made this new care service, right? And maybe you don't think about it. So I think there are a lot of those effect chains. And also when we travel, we don't travel so much with COVID, right? But before, and hopefully soon again, we will travel, and that also adds a global effect on that. You know, what happens when I go with my medicine and maybe technology like radio transmitting monitors, you know, and these things to another country which have other regulations around radio bandwidth, etc. Will my prototype radio beacon that monitors some bio-value all by sudden interfere with some technology in the country I'm visiting, for example? So there are a lot of those, I think, effect chains that one should at least be aware about and ask some questions about when one design. If that makes sense.
So our time is almost over. I'd like to thank you, Erik. You brought a really emergent knowledge to us. It's I know that in Europe, there's issues about care and design, they are much more advanced than here. And I have contact with this approach in 2018 when I went to Copenhagen and I met Eva Brandt, and it was the first time I had the contact with these issues. And I think last year I took part in Mansana school in Barcelona, and we discussed these issues and specifically about the immigrants, the issues about the immigrants. And I think it's an important issue that we have to bring it to our researchers, specifically participatory design. And I really thank you for your presence and let you make your last words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ok. Now em português, pessoal, muito obrigada pela presença nessa sessão. Eu e o Erik somos now, Erik and I, we are partners in PDC 2022. We are going to work on full paper. We are full paper chairs. and we are going to have the opportunity to go further in our discussions. E por favor, nós vamos agora para a próxima sessão, a última do dia. Vamos falar sobre a edição do dossiê do programa de pós-graduação em design aqui da UFMA, no Data Journal, em que vamos falar um pouquinho, vai ser um raio-x do nosso programa, em que nós vamos apresentar. Vemos vocês loguinho na outra sala. Thank you, Erik. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
André, você pode fechar, por favor?